Have you ever wondered what fate befell the women brave enough to love angels who defied heaven's laws? Prepare to uncover the astonishing tale of how Michael, heaven's fiercest warrior, not only brought judgment upon the fallen, but devised a punishment so extraordinary it echoes through our legends today. You will discover why these once beloved wives were stripped of hope, how their hearts were bound by divine decree, and why their sorrowful wails still drift through our myths as haunting siren songs. Picture Michael's sword gleaming with celestial fire, arcing through the stormy skies as he confronts the wives who dared to stand beside traitorous angels. At first, they pleaded for mercy, their tears shimmering like starlight against the dark. Yet, Michael's resolve was unshakable. What unimaginable sentence did he pronounce? And how did those words transform gentle women into the spectral figures forever bound to Earth's shores? If you are ready to follow this heartbreaking journey from forbidden love to divine retribution, type 777 in the comments, and let us step together into the hidden chapters of the Book of Enoch. Trust me, the truth you are about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about justice, mercy, and the power of love denied. You won't believe what Michael did to the wives of fallen angels. Way up in the crystalline courts of heaven, the angels moved with perfect purpose, lifting their voices in unbroken praise, their every breath sustaining the cosmos. Their sole mission was clear: serve the Almighty without hesitation or desire. But then came the moment that should never have been. Have you ever felt a single glance stop you cold, as though your very soul had been wrenched aside? That's exactly what happened when these mighty seraphim peered down at earth and beheld women whose beauty outshone every radiance they'd ever known. These were not mere mortals. They were flesh and blood, warmth and breath, pulsing with a humanity angels could neither comprehend nor resist. Can you imagine the shock that rippled through their ranks? Beings of pure light, once untainted by yearning, found their hearts pounding with a longing they could not explain. Every time they stole another glance, their once vibrant halos flickered and dimmed, as though the brightness of heaven itself were bleeding away. You were perfect in all your ways, from the day you were created. Ezekiel warns, till iniquity was found in you. Ezekiel 28:15. Yet these watchers had never known such iniquity until now. As their fascination deepened, they began to murmur among themselves. What is this stirring in my breast? Why does my spirit ache at the sight of earth's daughters? Their thoughts, once pure conduits of divine will, swirled with illicit yearnings. In secret council, they debated, could we truly resist this human allure, or are we destined to fall? Each stolen moment beneath the mortal sky bound them tighter to a destiny of rebellion. Down on earth, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Women rising with dawn's first light to tend fields and hearths, their laughter weaving through market stalls as they bartered for bread and olives, their hands gentle as they rocked infants to sleep. They shared quiet smiles over pitchers of wine, exchanged whispered hopes beneath vine-laden pergolas, and celebrated life's simple joys, unaware that high above immortal watchers were shattering every boundary just to catch a glimpse of their grace. Yet even as the daughters of Adam went about their daily rhythms, an undercurrent of mystery began to stir within their hearts. Have you ever sensed eyes upon you in a crowded room and felt both honored and terrified all at once? That was their secret. An unspoken knowing that they were more than ordinary, as though some divine spotlight had chosen them for a fate beyond imagining. The breeze itself seemed to carry a distant rumble echoing the warning Jeremiah once uttered. "Behold, the days are coming when I will send a famine not of bread, but of hearing the words of the Lord." Jeremiah 8:16. In this case, the famine was of normalcy, replaced by an electric tension that crackled through every whispered prayer. The air grew heavy, pregnant with portent, like the hush that descended over Sinai, before the mountain trembled and the voice of God rolled like thunder. Exodus 19:18. Mothers paused mid-stitch, fingers trembling over threads that suddenly seemed too fragile. Young brides caught themselves staring skyward as though expecting a miracle or a warning to break from the clouds. Even the birds fell silent, wings poised in mid-flight, as if the entire creation held its breath. They felt the scorch of temptation the moment they first dared to look away from heaven's throne. Every time a thought of exile flickered through their minds, they recalled their sacred identity, God's faithful servants, immortal guardians of light. Yet that whisper of longing grew impossible to ignore. Have you ever noticed how the smallest ember can ignite an unexpected blaze? That was their plight. Each angel began to wonder, what if we could taste the full spectrum of human emotion? Joy, sorrow, passion. What if our immortal hearts could mirror the tender ache of love? You were perfect in all your ways. The prophet Ezekiel warned Ezekiel 28:15, till iniquity was found in you. And in that single line lay their doom. Their very purpose, the sole devotion of their existence, was being eclipsed by a hunger they could neither name nor resist. They imagined the sting of a mother's embrace, the warmth of a spouse's hand, the thrill of a shared heartbeat. With each day, more of them paused mid-worship to cast longing glances toward the mortal realm, their once brilliant wings paling under the weight of forbidden desire. Can you feel the tension in their ranks? A silent war waged within a battle between duty and the intoxicating pull of flesh. With every sunrise, more of heaven's host found themselves irresistibly drawn to earth, first in small clusters, then in ever larger throngs. Can you picture them, these once steadfast sentinels hovering on the edge of the firmament, their wings folding into helpless fascination? Each day, their celestial ranks swelled their once unwavering resolve, gnawing away at the core of their identity. Have you ever felt the ground shift beneath your feet, as though your very purpose were unraveling? That was their torment, torn between the sacred duty they'd sworn to uphold and the wild yearnings their own hearts now harbored. Stay true to their divine mandate. Guard the cosmos, cloak themselves in purity, echo the eternal song of praise or surrender to an ache they'd been told should never exist in angelic breast. With every stolen look at a mortal smile, every secret longing for a human touch, their resolve crumbled just a little more. Their halos, once blazing with unquenchable light, grew faint as though dimmed by the weight of forbidden desire. When the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. Job 38:7. An anthem they had once joined in chorus, now replaced by a silent, desperate questioning that echoed through the halls of heaven. Everything was poised on a knife's edge. Heaven and earth were never intended to intertwine. In this way, immortal glory colliding with fragile humanity. But now, these angels, the very ones who had borne witness to the creation of countless galaxies, stood ready to abandon their posts for a chance at what humans called love. The instant those watchful exiles crossed the boundary between heaven and earth, something uncanny rippled through the world below, though it was nowhere near the blessed kind of wonder. Picture the most dazzling face you've ever encountered, refined to impossible perfection, then multiply that radiance 1,000 times. That's who they were, fallen watchers reborn in breathtaking form. They didn't merely stride into villages, they glided, their feet barely brushing the ground, as if gravity itself honored their will. And when they spoke, their words didn't just convey meaning, they wove a melody so pure that even the sparrows hushed their song to listen. Around them, light shimmered in swirling auras, bathing humble huts and dusty courtyards in an otherworldly glow that rendered every earthly color dull by comparison. Have you ever tried to look away from the sun at high noon? The glare sears your eyes, yet you can't tear your gaze free. That's exactly what happened when these once holy insurgents arrived in market squares and village crossroads. Farmers froze mid-plow, children halted their laughter, and traders stood with coins frozen between their fingers, all powerless before that celestial spectacle. But it was the women who felt the deepest spell. Can you recall a moment when your heartbeat thundered so violently you feared it might explode your ribcage? These women knew the tremor well, only it wasn't mere infatuation. It was something far more ancient, a pull so fierce it whispered of destiny rather than desire. They have set their hearts on vanity, the prophet lamented of those who chase empty glory. Jeremiah 2:5. Yet nothing could prepare these villagers for the hollow perfection before them. Each fallen angel's skin gleamed like moonlit marble. Their eyes held the quiet depths of starry firmaments, and their smiles, oh, those enchanting curves of bliss, were the true snare. One flash of pearly immortal teeth could spark a fire in a woman's soul that no prayer or steel resolve could quench. What begins as delight in their presence soon curdles into a dangerous longing for perfection. Without righteousness is its own kind of torment. And in those first breath-stolen moments, the seeds of an unthinkable rebellion were sown, one that would unweave the very fabric of both heaven and earth. But you know how the oldest warnings often prove truest if it looks too perfect. Beware the hidden cost. That adage couldn't have rung more prophetic than in this tale. These weren't merely men of astonishing beauty. They were once pristine angels who had cast aside their sacred vows and renounced the very light that birthed them. At first glance, their features shone with an almost blinding radiant skin, like alabaster touched by dawn cheekbones carved with divine artistry. Yet if you looked closer, beneath those flawless visages lurked a disquieting undercurrent. Their smiles, at once mesmerizing, held secrets darker than midnight's depths, whispers of rebellion and ancient sorrow. And their eyes, oh, their eyes contained centuries of knowledge no mortal could ever fathom, as if each glance carried the weight of countless fallen worlds. Can you imagine standing before a being who knows your every hope and fear before you even speak your name? That was the plight of the women they encountered. Drawn in like moths to an unquenchable flame, they felt an irresistible pull, an enchantment more potent than any earthly romance. How could anyone resist a touch that promised the thrill of the heavens, the power of forbidden knowledge, the passion of a love that transcended mortal limits? Is it fair to blame the heart for responding to such an all-consuming glow? these angels wove visions of delight, visions of whispered secrets, undying devotion, and pleasures that outshone any human pledge. Yet, behind every tender vow lay the chilling truth these beguiling suitors were exiles from heaven, their very presence a betrayal of divine order. And so, each reluctant yes carried the weight of a gravely forbidden covenant, one that would demand a price neither earth nor sky was prepared to pay. But here's the terrifying truth. The more time these women spent in the fallen angel's presence, the more they themselves began to shimmer with an eerie, supernatural light. Have you ever worn a piece of clothing so bright it changed how you saw everything else around you? That was their fate. Simple tasks like fetching water at dawn or tending a garden suddenly felt dull and hollow. The touch of a mortal man once comforting now seemed as gray and flat as ash beside the electrifying brush of an angel's wing. These angels were no fools. They scanned the earth, selecting only the loveliest among women, those whose grace and spirit had already caught their immortal gaze from heaven's heights. Then, with the subtle mastery of illusion, they wrapped themselves in every woman's secret dreams. The promise of adoration whispered confidence is power that humans could never bestow. Did it feel like a fairy tale romance? Absolutely. Until you realized it was the prelude to a nightmare. Their voices could weave a symphony sweeter than any human lullaby, their promises more intoxicating than any earthly vow. And each time one of these unions was sealed, a tremor rippled through both realms. These marriages weren't mere alliances of flesh and blood. They were cosmic betrayals, unions never ordained by God. They gave themselves over to vile affections. The Apostle Paul warns Romans 1:26, and here we saw it exact its price in real time. What of the offspring from these unholy matches? That is where our tale plunges into its darkest depths. For the children born of angelic pride and human longing were neither wholly divine nor wholly mortal, but something far more fearsome, whose very existence would haunt the boundaries of heaven and earth alike. And then came the Nephilim, the terrifying offspring of those illicit unions. Have you ever watched a child sprout so fast you could almost see them grow before your eyes? Now imagine that on a colossal scale. These were no ordinary toddlers. They were giants born to tower over the tallest man, their limbs stretching skyward like ancient oaks. From the moment they emerged, their power was undeniable and utterly uncontrollable. When a Nephilim first took a step, the earth itself trembled beneath their weight. Can you picture a walk that echoed like an earthquake? Their footsteps cracked stone roads and felled wooden barricades without a second thought. And their voices, rather than the coos of childhood, erupted in thunderous roars that rattled windows and sent flocks of birds spiraling into the sky. He makes the earth tremble, touching the mountains, and they smoke, Psalm 104:32. That was the raw force these beings wielded at will. Born of an angel's celestial might and a human mother's fragile heart, the Nephilim inherited the worst of both worlds, the boundless rage of a godlike warrior and the unchecked emotions of a child. Imagine a toddler's tantrum scaled up to the size of a fortress, kicking down trees instead of cradles, shrieking, not for candy, but for conquest. When they hungered, their appetites could empty entire granaries in a single sitting. When they raged, their fury laid waste to villages as though they were crumbling sandcastles. And yet, these were not mere brutes. Some Nephilim possessed cunning far beyond human reckoning. They learned to exploit their mother's tears, bargaining for favors, as a politician bargains for power. They formed alliances, plotted raids, and studied the weakness of the defenseless. No one, not even entire armies, could stand against a handful of these towering, ruthless warriors. Townsfolk whispered in fear. Their strength is like that of 10 men, but they wield it without mercy. Did you ever wonder what happens when innocence and omnipotence collide? The Nephilim answered that question with every shattered doorway and every empty field. These giants were living proof that some combinations, however wondrous they might seem, are meant to remain forever forbidden. And as their rampage grew more relentless, the world below found itself teetering on the brink of utter annihilation. The question then became not whether the Nephilim would destroy humanity, but how the Creator would respond to such a horrific testament to hubris. High on his sapphire throne, the Almighty beheld the chaos unleashed below, and his heart ached at the sight. God's perfect order, where every star sang in harmony and every creature walked in peace, was unraveling at the hands of beings that should never have drawn breath. Can you imagine witnessing creation's crowning glory descend into shadow, as giants born of cosmic rebellion laid waste to fields and families? With every report that drifted up to heaven's courts, villages raised mothers wailing over empty doorsteps, fathers driven to despair. His righteous anger blazed hotter than the forge at Sinai. How long, O Lord, the psalmist once cried, will the wicked? How long will the wicked triumph? Psalm 94:3. And day by day that question thundered through the heavens as the Nephilim stalked the land, their thunderous footprints echoing like the roar of lions in a valley of bones. When the news of the Nephilim's terror reached heaven's heights, even the archangels, those mighty champions who once stood sentinel at God's throne, felt the weight of a dire calling. Can you imagine the dread that coursed through immortal veins at the thought of facing giants born of divine blood? These were no ordinary foes, but forces of nature given form, each one more powerful than the fiercest storm. Michael, the valiant defender, Gabriel, the herald of wonders, and their fellow princes of light knew that to confront a single Nephilim was to challenge a whirlwind. Yet hordes of them roamed the earth, leaving ruin in their wake. Cities trembled at their approach, for their strength was as 10,000 men, and their fury unchecked by mortal reason. How do you marshal an army against beings who brood with the power of angels and the savagery of beasts? So the archangels convened in the resplendent council chamber, its walls etched with the glory of creation. Strategy had to guide every wingbeat, for brute force alone would crumble against those titanic adversaries. Put on the full armor of God, the Apostle Paul would later instruct Ephesians 6:11. And so they girded themselves with faith, righteousness, and the sword of the Spirit. They could not simply charge headlong into the fray. These were not demonic legions to be scattered with a shout, but hybrids of heaven's own fabric. Each battle plan was etched in prayer, each formation blessed by the chorus of the faithful. Michael would lead the vanguard, his flaming blade tempered by divine justice. Gabriel would guard their flanks, his horn at the ready to rally wavering hearts. Uriel and Raphael stood by, poised to heal and to illuminate the darkest paths. And here's the ultimate advantage of having the Creator himself in your corner. You don't just get reinforcements. You get divine backup plans of unimaginable scale. When Michael Gabriel and the heavenly host realized their blades and shields might falter before the Nephilim's overwhelming might, the Lord of hosts stepped onto the field in a way no one could have foreseen. He unveiled a design so sweeping it would reshape every mountain valley and heart upon the earth. A flood, a deluge to wash away the corruption that had sprung from angelic rebellion. Can you imagine the look on those giants' faces when they heard the decree? For all their towering strength and ancient cunning, they could not stand against the voice of God himself. As the first raindrops fell, when I bring a flood of waters upon the earth. Genesis 6:17. It heralded both judgment and hope in a single breath. The skies darkened as though a veil had been drawn between creation and Creator, and the clouds rumbled like chariots preparing for war. Then the battle erupted in fury. Heaven's armies, radiant with holy purpose, clashed with the Nephilim amidst sulfur-lit skies. Lightning tore the firmament in two, and thunder shook the world's foundations as archangels wielded blazing swords against those unholy titans. Have you ever witnessed a storm so fierce it seemed the very gates of heaven had been thrown open? This was that storm, and it came not from the clouds alone, but from the clash of divine justice against fallen might. Still, the deluge waited on the horizon, its waters poised to rise and reclaim the world for innocence. As rivers swelled and the tide of judgment crept over plains and peaks, the Nephilim, those colossal tyrants bred of heaven's own blood, felt something they had never known: fear. Do you recall a moment when dread crept into your bones, telling you that no blade, no scheme, no strength of arms could save you? Their footfalls, once like thunder across the land, faltered before the inexorable advance of the flood. Have you ever watched a storm roll in so fierce that it steals the daylight, turning noon into midnight? Now imagine that darkness magnified 1,000,000-fold. That was the sky on the day God declared enough. The heavens didn't merely cloud over, they bled into a black, so absolute, it swallowed the horizon. Have you ever felt the air press so heavily on your chest that every breath feels like a battle? That suffocating weight signaled that something beyond ordinary weather was unfolding. At first, villagers whispered to one another that perhaps a late thunderstorm had caught them off guard. After all, rain was nothing new. But this was no ordinary downpour. These raindrops weren't gentle. They pounded earth and roof tiles like weeping stones cast down from heaven's vault. They didn't fall. They crashed in relentless sheets, hour upon hour, day upon day, as though divine tears had decided never to cease. For behold, I will bring a flood of waters upon the earth. He had warned through his prophet to destroy all flesh under heaven. Genesis 6:17. And now that warning had come to life. What of the Nephilim? Those towering offspring of angel and woman who had once strode the earth with utter impunity. For the first time, fear twisted their gargantuan features. Can you picture creatures who once crushed boulders with a single grasp, now rendered helpless by a tide that knew no mercy? They scrambled toward the highest peaks cliffs that had borne witness to eons of history, only to see the floodwaters surge ever upward, mocking their frantic ascent. Their massive limbs carried no advantage here. Nature itself had risen in divine rebellion. A roar of anguish shook the wind. Everywhere you turned, desperate cries pierced the deluge. Have mercy. Save us, mothers. Clutched trembling children to sodden chests. Fathers beat their fists against the roaring walls of water and every plea reached the ears of the fallen angels standing above, powerless. Can you imagine the horror in their immortal eyes as they watched the gigantic suns they had sired the Nephilim flail and gasp beneath the surging tide they once dominated? Not even their godlike strength could hold back a single wave of divine wrath. In that moment, it became clear this was no ordinary storm, but the execution of God's own decree, and no force in heaven or on earth could turn it aside. Amid the cataclysm, one timber shell floated above the chaos Noah's Ark. Picture yourself huddled in that creaking sanctuary, rain lashing the roof like hailstones of judgment, waves vaulting skyward, only to crash down in bone-shattering roars. Inside, the last faithful souls and pairs of every living creature pressed together in hope and dread. Through narrow slits, you'd glimpse the world you once knew vanish beneath the flood. Hear the final gasps of those swept away. Did you ever stand on the brink of helplessness, knowing you could hear, but never reach the ones you longed to save? That was their cruel truth. Locked behind logs and pitch, they could only pray as the waters claimed everything else. Higher and higher, the waters climbed first, the wheat fields, then the oak forests, then the crags of the hills themselves, until even the loftiest summits were swallowed by endless roiling seas. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down, Psalm 104:8, yet not even the loftiest peaks could pierce the flood's veil. And the Nephilim, those towering colossi, whose footsteps once shook nations, found their ferocity rendered meaningless. Their mighty arms, forged in celestial fire, could not stave off the suffocating depths. In that deluge, their downfall was writ plain. When God's judgment falls, no strength, no cunning, and no arrogance can bar his will. Chained in the shadowy recesses of heaven's prison, the fallen angels could do nothing but stare in mute horror as the floodwaters claimed every trace of the world they had defiled. Picture them bound by bars of light, their immortal hearts pounding as beloved faces vanished beneath the waves, their human brides whose laughter once stirred their souls, the towering progeny who had marched like living avalanches, even the grand cities they had whispered into being, all swept away in a single merciless tide. Have you ever felt the sting of helplessness so sharp it felt like ice piercing your bones? That was their agony, witnessing the once vibrant globe they had corrupted, being cleansed as though by divine mercy and wrath. For 40 relentless days and nights, the heavens unleashed an unending deluge. Rain did not merely fall. It pounded the earth in a symphony of judgment's drums, drowning valleys and carving canyons anew. When the final drop descended, the world lay beneath an endless heaving ocean. No mountain peak dared breach the surface, no ancient forest offered shelter, no ruined city stood as testament to former glories. Only the stout timber of Noah's Ark bobbed on that vast expanse, a solitary citadel of hope, afloat on judgment's sea. And then slowly, the waters receded, unveiling a world reborn. Could you imagine stepping onto dry land for the first time in weeks, only to find every monument of memory gone, every footprint of the Nephilim erased? It was as if God himself had pressed the cosmic reset button, wiping the slate clean. Yet for those silent watchers, especially the human wives once bound to angelic rebels, a far grimmer fate awaited them. Their final reckoning was only just beginning. You'd think the moment the last wave rolled back and the earth's first green shoots appeared, salvation would finally feel real. But for a certain group of survivors, the true nightmare was only just beginning. Those very women who had pledged their hearts to the fallen angels. They had emerged from the flood's dreadful embrace alive, yet what greeted them on dry land was no reprieve, but a new kind of anguish. Imagine giving your entire soul to someone who seemed invincible, someone whose mere presence radiated power and perfection, only to witness that once majestic figure dragged off in iron fetters. Have you ever felt your chest tighten in helpless horror, as though the world's breath had been stolen? That was their agonizing reality. Their angelic spouses, beings who once glowed with celestial grace, were now prisoners of divine judgment, cast into the very shadows they had once defied. Some lay shackled in hidden valleys where the sun dared not venture. Others found themselves confined in spiritual prisons, realms not made for mortal rescue. Picture a mountain-sized titan whose footsteps once shook entire cities, now bound hand and foot, unable even to lift a finger in comfort. He delivers the needy when he calls the poor, and him who has no helper. The psalmist declares, Psalm 72:12. Yet here were these fallen warriors utterly helpless, their mighty strength rendered meaningless by chains of divine decree. They found themselves stranded on that freshly cleansed earth, each woman alone with the crushing weight of her own choices. Can you imagine the horror of waking to a world you helped drown? Some of them could bear it no longer. They sank to their knees on the bare ground, hands clawing at the soil, voices trembling as they cried out, "Have mercy upon me, O God," echoing David's plea in Psalm 51:1. Their sobs rose in ragged waves, tears flowing until every last drop was spent. Only then did the silence press in a hollow reminder of all they had lost. Yet, amid that sea of broken repentance, a fire still burned in one heart, Naamah. Remembered for her beauty and bold spirit, she refused to bow. Why should she kneel when her face had once been sought by angels? Even now, blood-red wine of pride thick in her veins, she stood tall against the horizon, chin-lifted eyes aflame with defiance. Have you ever known someone so caught in the ecstasy of their own allure that they cannot see the chains it forges? Naamah wore her arrogance like a crown, even though it was the very thing that ensnared her soul. Her laughter, once a siren's call, now rang hollow in the still morning air. While others begged for forgiveness, she clasped her hands at her waist, unwilling to yield. In that moment, her pride became her prison, her greatest sin, and her most unbreakable shackle. And as the sun rose on a world reborn, Naamah remained a monument to the peril of hearts that cannot bend. They say there's no cruelty, quite like a curse wrapped in beauty, and God's justice proved both imaginative and ruthless. Can you imagine waking each morning to discover your own reflection, luring others to ruin? That was the fate of the women who had once loved the fallen angels, transformed into sirens of old, their voices now a fatal melody, their faces so ravishing that any sailor or traveler who glimpsed them was hypnotized before disaster struck. Their beauty was a snare. The prophet warns Hosea 13:2, and here that warning took flesh in the most heartbreaking way. These women, once full of hope, now found themselves walking tombs, cursed to draw the unwary onto jagged reefs or into treacherous waters. Have you ever felt your own gifts turn against you? Imagine a power you once celebrated becoming the tool of your own torment. Each time they sang, a soul was lost. Each time they smiled, a life was forfeit. They had become living echoes of the devastation they had first welcomed. The psychological wounds ran deeper than any physical pain. Guilt gnawed at their hearts like a relentless tide. How could they live knowing their choices had helped flood the world? Some sank into delirium voices, lost in endless lament. Others became hollowed figures walking reminders of paradise lost. Psalm 32:3 speaks of how my bones wasted away under unconfessed sin. These women knew that ache intimately every breath, a dagger of remorse bound in their shadowed cells. The angelic husbands felt every echo of their wives' suffering, each wail of despair, every whisper of madness resonating through the very bars that held them captive. Imagine being immortal, yet powerless, as agony rippled across an expanse you cannot cross. Their tears like molten silver fell in silence, for even fallen grace could not erase the guilt that choked them, nor grant them the strength to reach through divine chains. Have you ever experienced frustration, so absolute when you see loved ones in agony, yet cannot so much as touch their hands? This was their eternal torment. Meanwhile, the angels who had never wavered in loyalty received a solemn commission to guard a world reborn from ruin. He will not let your foot slip. He who watches over you will not slumber. Psalm 121, 3-4 they whispered as they took up their vigil. Day and night they patrolled Earth's borders and skies, ensuring no echo of forbidden love would spark a new calamity. From distant heights they beheld the sirens, once their sisters-in-law, still singing those fatal refrains to any who would listen. They watched over the trembling hands of humanity as people rebuilt homes, sowed fields, and sought to bury the memory of the flood. In every quiet sunrise, they stood sentinel, steadfast, in purpose, determined that the scars of heaven's folly would never again bleed into the fabric of earth. A hush settled over the cleansed earth, new life stirring in the ashes, yet old wounds still throbbing beneath the surface. The loyal angels held their vigil from afar, bound by the hard truth that some divine borders must never be breached, no matter the pull to cross them. But amidst that fragile peace erupted a secret so explosive it rocked heaven's very core, a duel between Michael and Lucifer, and their prize, the body of Moses, the man whose staff once split the Red Sea. Exodus 14:21-22. This wasn't some casual skirmish. It was a showdown of epic stakes locked away in the margins of a forgotten 3,000-year-old manuscript few have ever seen. Why did Michael's holy fury flare at Lucifer's demand? What power lay in Moses' mortal frame that made the morning star covet it so fiercely? The answers lie hidden in that ancient volume, and what followed rewrote everything we thought we knew about angelic hierarchy, divine justice, and the mysteries of life beyond the grave. If you're ready to uncover the celestial secrets that have lain buried for millennia, keep watching, because once you learn what truly transpired, there's no turning back. As Michael's flaming sword sheathed, and the echoes of those mournful cries faded into the night, the wives of the fallen were forever transformed. No longer mere mortals, but sirens whose lament warns us of love's highest price. Remember, this choices born of passion can lead even the purest hearts into unending sorrow. If this tale of divine justice and forbidden love stirred something in your own heart, please like, share, and subscribe so you never miss our deep dives into Scripture's most haunting mysteries. Drop a 777 in the comments to show you're standing with us on this journey through heaven's hidden chapters. May the Lord grant you discernment to recognize true devotion, peace to heal every wound, and courage to uphold both love and righteousness. Until we meet again, be blessed, stay vigilant, and let the echoes of those siren songs guide you toward mercy, not despair.